so this happened a while back. I was probably around 10 or 11 years old, meaning my brother, we'll call him Alex, was around 8 or 9. We were walking home from the bus, which takes about 7 minutes to do, when I noticed that something was off. I didn't see anything at first, but I definitely just knew that something was wrong. My brother and I start walking home. The only two who got off at our stop were he and I. This blue and silver beat-up truck drives past us, and at first I think nothing of it. I mean, it never slowed down or stopped or anything. It just kept right on going. Alex and I were holding hands, as my grandmother had always told me to do that since he was my baby brother and I didn't want him to get lost or anything bad to happen to him. Nothing happened at first, but then I noticed that same truck driving around again, driving our way this time. There was a cul-de-sac at the end of our road. It was driving much slower this time. It went up the road and turned out of sight. By this point, Alex and I were nearing the three-way intersection that connected the cul-de-sac road to the other side road, right off the main one the man had just drove down. I happened to look down the street and see the truck driving extremely slow, back down the street towards us once again. I knew in that moment we had to run. I knew there was no other option. I knew that if we didn't, my brother and I would not be safe. I don't know how I knew this, but I knew it in my heart. As soon as we passed a house that blocked us from view, I turned to Alex and spoke to him exactly 4 words. No questions, just run. And run we did. In our driveway, which was about 100 feet long, there was a big row of bushes and pine trees that divided our home from our next-door neighbor. I dragged him into the bushes and told him to be quiet, and I'd explain everything later. I watched as that same truck drove up and down the cul-de-sac again before coming to a stop right in front of our house. I had to hold my brother's mouth shut because he was crying. I was scared that whoever was following us would hear him and hurt us. Honestly, I was more worried for him than myself at this point. I was in fight-or-flight mode. I was the big sister, and it was my job to protect him. I looked down at him and told him the truck had been following us, but I told him not to be scared. I wouldn't let anyone hurt him. Thankfully, it seemed to calm him down just a little. After what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, the door to the truck opened, and out hopped a man. He was tall, skinny, and messy. Short hair covered by a torn baseball cap, ripped jean shorts, and a puke green tank top. He entered our yard and looked around a bit. Alex and I were still in the bushes. I was trying to find a way to get to our house safely without alerting this dude's attention. The guy left after what felt like forever and entered his car once more. He started it and began to drive away slowly. I waited a few minutes to make sure he was gone before turning to my brother and saying, "We need to run, okay? When I count to 3, we're going to run behind the house to the back door." He agreed, and we waited a few more seconds before I started counting. I really didn't have a good feeling about this, but I knew we couldn't just wait here forever. I started counting. As soon as I hit 3, we booked it across our driveway and into our front yard to go around the house. As soon as we left our spot, I heard it immediately, the sound of accelerating. He'd seen us. He was just waiting for us to leave. He chased us up our driveway as we ran around the side. I grabbed Alex's hand and practically dragged him around the house. I made him run ahead to the garage door to see if it was locked while I searched for my house key. The garage door was open. I swear to God, I saw this man round the opposite corner of the house that we did, just as I managed to enter. We entered the door and slammed it shut, locking and deadbolting it as well. I didn't stop running until I opened the main house door and ran downstairs with Alex, screaming our safe word. My grandmother had made a safe word for us that was a normal everyday word we could use if we were in danger. We just had to scream it basically. It woke up my aunt who worked the night shift and was sleeping. We told her everything and she stayed with us until my grandmother got home. We called the police. That was actually my first ever interaction with an officer. The man was never caught though. To this day, I don't know what he wanted, but I know for sure it was not good. I'm just glad my grandma drilled stranger danger into my head. I don't know where my brother or I would be right now if she hadn't done that. I was about 7 years old, my brother about 10 or so. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just the three of us at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bedroom. At either end of this hallway were these windowed doors that we always kept locked and very rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard. The door on my brother's end opened to our back porch. The house kinda leaned into a small hill, if that makes sense. My brother and mom both had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was a very light sleeper, and they just couldn't seem to help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back toward the bathroom. I'm gonna try to pee before I go to bed this time. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. I don't know if my mom wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories to try to scare me, or if she was already just half asleep and didn't catch it, but she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was completely terrified of it. The fear of seeing a ghost like that at the end of the hallway or through the windows was the reason I started running from my stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog we'd had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mom suddenly blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food we had?" This really caught me by surprise because in all the years I'd lived in that house, we never once called the cops. Gun owner family in a quiet rural West Virginia neighborhood. You know the deal. I asked her what she was talking about. She looked equally surprised, as if she had just revealed a big secret by accident. "Oh, that's right. I never told you because you were too young at the time. I remember one night I woke up hearing noises outside my window. When I looked out, I saw a man staring into my bedroom." She went on to describe how the lights caused him to take off running and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I gave them when they showed up. A tall white male wearing a striped shirt and jeans, I think. Short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in the area. I think he had just escaped from jail on a murder charge or something. Now, I know it sounds so obvious, hearing those two stories back to back, but it wasn't until just a few years ago, in my mid-20s, that I pieced together my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who had spent multiple nights casing our home. I just came back from dinner with my mom, and we talked about something that happened literally 20 years ago. While we did, I thought it might be a good story to share. Now, before I can jump in, I need to sketch the surroundings just a bit. At the time, my mom was 43, and I was 18 years old. Our relation at the time wasn't exactly very good. Admittedly, that was pretty much my fault. I was a very rebellious teenager then, and important for the story, I was caught up in the metal scene at the time, among other things being the vocalist of a black metal band. You know, those inhuman screeches, it's actually a real trick. Next to that, I had picked up a strong liking for weed. My mom stood out less in both attire and manners. Although, and yes, this is important too, she liked the color blue and had long blonde hair. Behind our own house stood a house owned by Social Services, an organization that provided sheltered living. So there lived 3 men, Abe, Bart, and Carl. Abe and Bart were obviously in need of help, but completely harmless. Carl was, even in that company, something special. Not on first sight. He was a rather diminutive guy who dressed quite well. But well, if people are really, really detached from reality, all you have to do is look into their eyes and you immediately know. Carl might have been heavily medicated, but he was still batshit crazy. I don't know what really was the problem. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything, but in a nutshell, he suffered extreme religious delusions and was convinced that some people were angels, some were demons, and others were characters from the Bible. I did not know that, but in hindsight, let me give you a rundown of how I looked when I returned home from a show. Long hair, a beard, a rather muscular build, a black frock like monks wear, a studded leather belt and arm bracelets, a big pentagram around my neck, and I went full out corpse paint. So, in short, after seeing me walk around like that a few times and hearing the frequent arguments my mom and I had, Carl became convinced I was an actual demon. And here comes the catch. My mom was apparently the Virgin Mary. Blue clothes, long blonde hair, remember? He thought I wanted to abduct her away into hell. But he had his medication and he wasn't a danger to anybody, right? Until on a hot summer day, I got a visit from the police because I had gotten into a fight. So, what did my mom do? She invited the cops to sit in the yard while they talked to me. To Carl, though, that was somehow the straw that broke the camel's back. The cops left. I succeeded in convincing them I just happened to be near the fight, and my mom and I started arguing. At that same moment, Carl made the decision to start skipping his medication. A week later, I had a show in a neighboring city, so around 3 a.m. I returned. Because I wasn't that stupid, I didn't drink or smoke before getting in my car. I was planning on doing that afterward, though. In the car were 2 of my bandmates, Andres and Quentin. I go inside. My mom is fast asleep. I grab a few beers while they sit in the garden. Smoking had to happen outside, and besides, it was pretty hot anyway. We sit, chat, smoke, drink. All is great, until Carl takes this opportunity to act. "What the fuck?" said Andres. He pointed at the hedge at the end of our garden. All 3 of us, intoxicated by then, watched Carl dressed in a white gown and with an aluminum circle on his head, wrestle himself through the hedge. "And what do you think you're doing?" I said. "Begone, forces of evil!" he shouted, waving at us with a rather large cross, almost as long as my arm actually. At that moment, I'll admit we had no idea what to do. If you think about it, he probably took that as a sign that his cross had worked. He ran to my open back door, my clue to run behind him, screaming at him to stop. He entered my house, shrieking that he was coming to save the Virgin Mary. Now it gets weird. My mom woke up from all the shouting finally. She wore white PJs and had her hair loose. Carl must have thought she'd just descended from heaven, so he bolted it up the stairs, fell to his knees, and started praying in front of her. The 3 demons behind him were, strangely enough, not repelled by this. I grabbed him by his scrawny neck, totally ready to go medieval on him. I mean, we had our problems, sure, but this is my mom we're talking about. He jumped up and wrestled himself free with unimaginable strength and managed to smack Quentin across the head with his cross. Andres and I backed up. We looked at each other and nodded. Now, Carl was going down. "Stop!" my mom said, as loud as she could. She walked up to Carl and took his hand. "I think you're seeing this wrong." He looked up at her and started crying. I mean, ugly bawling. He told her he just wanted to protect her from us. "I know. I know, but that really isn't necessary. I whispered to Andres to call the cops downstairs, and I stayed there with my mom. Look, he's just a kid that likes to dress himself up. I don't really like it either, but it's just a game. She motioned at me, and I lost my frock, the belt, and all that other stuff. Underneath, I was only wearing my boxers. I wish I had a picture of this moment. Carl was still on his knees crying. My mom standing before him smiling. Quentin sitting against the wall holding his head and bleeding. I was standing in my boxers. I mean, you don't have to be crazy to get confused by all of this. Carl took a deep breath. But you're the Virgin Mary. No, I'm just a nice lady, and they're my son and his friends. And you're Carl. It's all okay. He looked at me and then my mom. He stood up and grabbed his cross. He looked at it and then said in an almost childish voice, "Didn't I tell you?" He made his way downstairs through the garden, through the hedge and back to his own place. Somewhat later, the cops showed up. We explained everything, and the very next day, Carl moved out. That was the story about the one man I don't want to meet again, and how I learned that my mom is underneath her appearance brave and smart as fuck. To conclude this, 2 days later, his social worker paid us a visit, telling us what happened in Carl's mind leading up to that night, repeating over and over how happy they were nobody was harmed. I, by then my usual braggadocious teenage self once again, said, I would have dealt with him. The social worker shook his head. Apparently, Carl didn't only have a cross, he also had a large kitchen knife and several other weapons under his gown as well. This happened to me about a month ago, but it still boggles my mind. 2 points of background to make this story make sense. 1, I live in Tokyo and commute via those famously crazy crowded trains daily. There exists on them this kind of unspoken agreement that everyone works together to make this suck as little as possible. People, for the most part, hold their backpacks in front of them. Men don't manspread, etc. That's when the trains are full, though. About 2 stops before mine, the train went from sardine can to everyone on this train could lay on the seats and still have plenty of room left over. Usually, I could just sit down at this point. 2, I'm not a Japanese woman. Very obviously so, even when I'm in my white dress shirt and pencil skirt like all the other office drones. I'm often the only obviously non-Japanese woman on my train in the morning. Despite my appearance though, I'm quite fluent in Japanese. One day, I sit down when the train empties out, headphones in, mobile game going, ready to enjoy the 10 minutes of sitting I get on my hour-long commute. I'm sitting with my legs crossed, but there's maybe 10 people in the whole car, so it's not like I was in anyone's way or anything. I had tuned out already, when all of a sudden a hand reached out and grabbed my bare knee. I, of course, jolted straight out of my skin. I ripped my headphones out and looked up at the hand's owner. It was some skinny old Japanese dude, maybe in his 60s or so. He pointed at my legs and then at the other people on the train. Again, a max of 10 in a car that could hold 50 plus easily, and probably had held 80 just 10 minutes ago. In slightly broken English, he said, "You must not cross legs." I was so bewildered by this, I started to tell him in Japanese, "The train isn't crowded right now, I'm not in anyone's way." He obviously didn't like this answer. He reached for my legs again, and presumably tried to forcibly uncross them himself. I, liking even less of this, summoned my loudest non-scream. "Don't touch me!" Thankfully, this was enough to get him to back off. Another thing you didn't do on trains like these was make a fuss. Sadly though, yet another thing you don't do here is get involved. So despite a woman all but screaming, "Don't touch me," it's obviously some foreign woman causing trouble. Best not to get involved, etc., etc. So no one comes over to help either. I've made it clear that I will not stand for physical confrontation. This old dude felt comfortable enough to stand directly in front of me, nearly knee to knee, and loom over me while he repeated endlessly, You must." He did this for at least 5 minutes. I didn't move, I didn't blink or break eye contact. I started plans B through P of how to get off this train at the next stop. Thankfully, he gave up before then, shaking his head and calling me a rude bitch in Japanese before wandering off. I still take that same train to work, but I haven't seen him ever since. I hope I don't ever meet this leg police fucker ever again, lest he find out what happens when you loom over a girl at dick punting height. This all happened yesterday. I'm writing this on my phone from our motel room, so please forgive any errors. Here we go. Fort Bragg, California is a small beach town northwest of Sacramento. It has kind of a Stephen King feel to it. You know what I mean. It's misty, almost kind of an eerily small harbor town. It's beautiful though, and a very big tourist attraction as well. You get people from all over the US that travel here. My fiance and I decided to drive up here after I had to take some time off work due to stress. It was a very last-minute decision. We packed up our bags in less than 10 minutes, grabbed our dog, and took off. If we wouldn't have had our dog with us, I'm pretty sure I would have lost her. I guess this is the part where I tell the story, right? It's our second day here right now, and we're staying at a motel that overlooks the ocean. You can see the fog roll in during the early hours of the morning and watch the fishing boats leave the harbor to go get their haul for the day. It's a really stunning thing to see. We woke up quite early, and I was craving, and I mean absolutely craving, eggs and bacon. After getting dressed and deciding what spot to stuff our faces at, we left on our morning adventure. See, here's where I'd made my mistake. I was driving down the road, and it looked like the stop we crawled up to was a 4-way stop sign. I guessed wrong because when I pulled out and cut off a small Ford Ranger with a dinky trailer attached to it and 2 old men driving, I realized a little bit too late that I'd just cut them off. They threw up their hands and pointed at me, but Lily didn't even seem to notice it. I threw up my hands in a sorry, I'm just a dipshit tourist kind of way. They just stared me down. It was a hillbilly standoff George Strait would be proud of. I didn't really think too much of it though. Instead, I kept driving down the foggy 2-lane road to go get breakfast. I didn't even think to say anything to her about it. I never thought I'd see them again, and I didn't want her to complain about me not knowing how to drive. I was wrong though. I was so wrong, and I'll never forget what happened next. We went back to the motel after a not so great but overly expensive breakfast. We cuddled up and talked about our plans for the future and what we wanted to do in life. Midway through our conversation though, she realized we were out of dog food to feed Bruce. I agreed to go down to the cute but very creepy market nearby and grab a bag of goodies. I kissed her on the cheek and jumped in the Navi. We called our navigator Navi. I left and had gotten about halfway to the store before I realized I'd forgotten my wallet on the nightstand. When I pulled back into the parking lot, I saw it. That same Ford Ranger with the janky trailer still attached to it. The only difference was that Hank and Boomhauer weren't inside of it this time. That's strange. I don't remember seeing them here last night, I thought. I walked up to our door while looking over my shoulder wondering, what are the chances these douchebags are staying here? Not 2 seconds later, my heart started beating faster. Our motel door was open, but barely cracked. It was open slightly to the point where you could see just a sliver of light but nothing more. I slowly pushed it open and looked inside, but I didn't see anything. Lily and Bruce were both gone. It was like they were never even there at all. My heart started racing. I dropped my keys on the floor and ran outside, heart pounding in my chest faster than a jackhammer in New York. I didn't see those creepy old guys from the Ford truck or Lily outside. I was becoming angry and frantic at this point. Fuck, where are you guys at? I thought before the screaming inside my head was cut off by the sound of familiar barking. I heard Bruce barking and I ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my entire 28 years of life. I ran straight over to the front office where the sound was coming from. That's when I saw her and our dog inside. She was crying, sitting on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. His hair was standing straight up until he saw it was me sprinting towards them. Lily got up and ran into my arms. Meanwhile, the clerk was on the phone. I was wondering what the fuck happened in those 2 minutes I was gone. This is what she told me happened, and it makes my blood run cold. Turns out, as soon as I left, not 30 seconds went by when those inbred assholes knocked on the door. Lily opened it up thinking it was me forgetting my wallet, which I did. They tried to force their way into the room saying, "You can thank your boy toy for what's coming to you." They grabbed her and covered her mouth, but those assholes didn't realize one thing. We had a dog in our backseat when I cut them off. Bruce jumped off the bed and didn't hesitate to bite the one grabbing her. They kicked him and tried to shake him off, but he wouldn't let go. After being bit and realizing the noise would draw attention if they didn't leave, they ran off, and Lily was able to sprint to the front office and wait for help while Bruce followed suit. I wasn't there. I couldn't protect her. If we would have found a dog sitter and our plans weren't last minute, she could be gone right now. But my dog was there, and he did exactly what a good boy, no, the best boy would do. And for that, he's truly my best friend. If he wasn't there, what could have happened? Would she have been kidnapped, beaten, killed, all of the above? The craziest thing is that they haven't even been caught yet. We filed all the reports with the local sheriff. I told him what happened earlier that morning, and the cop looked right at me and said, "You're lucky your dog was there. If he wasn't and they got in there with her, you could have been filing a very different report right now." I got tears in my eyes at that. I looked over at Lily and Bruce and thank God I rescued him from the pound, because in return he rescued the love of my life when I wasn't there. So last night I was at a classmate's house, working on a group project we have due tomorrow. I live in an apartment in the town where our university is located. My classmate lives at his parents' house, which is in the foothills just outside of town. In order to get to the house, you have to drive along a relatively secluded and narrow 2-lane road for about 5 or 6 miles. We started working on the project at about 6 p.m., and I ended up hanging around for a while after we had finished our working. I left his house pretty late, at about 11 or so, and started down the road back towards town. I didn't quite realize how tough it would be though to navigate this road at night. There were no streetlights and the road was completely unkempt and riddled with potholes. On top of this, I had no cell service either, so I had to drive very slowly to make sure I didn't blow out one of my tires, since I had just used my spare a couple of weeks back. I figure I was about 3 miles from the house when I rounded a tight corner and saw a pickup truck with a camper shell parked diagonally across the road. The manner in which it was parked completely impeded my path forward, and I couldn't drive around it either. There was a gully on both sides of the road. The only way for me to go at this point was backward, where there was a pull-off that I could use to turn my car around. At first, I couldn't see inside the cab, but when I turned on my high beams, I saw there was a man slouched over in the driver's seat, his head resting against the steering wheel as if he had just been knocked out by a very bad accident. I immediately sensed that something was wrong here. The way his car had just coincidentally come to rest in a position that totally blocked off the road was a big red flag for me. I had heard stories before of people playing dead in the road as a way to lure unsuspecting people out of their cars so they could try and rob them. I decided, fuck this shit. I elected to go back to my classmate's house and explain exactly what was going on. I threw the car into reverse and kept my eyes darting back and forth between my rear view and that truck. I looked and saw that I was almost at the pull-off where I could turn around finally. When I looked back at that truck, my heart skipped about 5 beats. The man who had just moments ago been slouched over in the driver's seat was now sprinting at my car at a hurried pace, while a few other men jumped out of the camper shell and started moving towards me as well. I panicked and accelerated backwards into the pull-off, which messed up the undercarriage of my car pretty bad. As I put it into drive, the guy had already reached my passenger side door and was tugging on the handle. Thank the Lord I had remembered to lock it. I only got a brief glimpse of him, but his face appeared to be scabbed and leathery. Definitely a meth head or some sort of drug abuser. I sped away and didn't slow down at all until I reached the house, constantly checking my rear view to see if they were following. Thankfully, they didn't tail me, and when I reached the house, I explained what had happened to my classmate. We called the cops together. I was extremely grateful my buddy's parents were kind enough to let me stay that night. They didn't find anyone on the road matching the description, but I filed an incident report. They told me they would be on the lookout for similar vehicles and suspicious activity. But holy shit, I'm still so shaken up over it. I kept getting the same adrenaline rush I got when I saw the guy charging me whenever I think about it. Please share any similar experiences you've had. I would appreciate a good read or discussion to help me clear my headspace on this incident. To put this into context, I'm an 18-year-old girl living in New Zealand. I suffer from anxiety and shut down in stressful situations. I tend to become rather overwhelmed when I'm not sure how to deal with something. This story happened yesterday, whilst I was waiting at my bus station to catch a ride home. I'd had a very long day at work, and my legs were very much in pain. All I wanted to do was get home and watch some YouTube or read something in bed or something. It was getting quite dark and the sun was almost completely down. As I was listening to some music in a rather deserted area of the bus station, a man considerably larger than myself sauntered up and sat down directly next to me on the bench. I didn't really think much of this at first. To put this into perspective, I'm roughly 55 kilograms. He must have been at least 100 and could have very easily overpowered me. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that this man was staring at me. I began to feel a little bit uncomfortable and pegged it up to maybe him looking at my mask or something. It was rather nondescript and just black. I ignored this and acted busy on my phone to avoid conversation. As I said, I'd had a long day at work and would rather not be bothered. The man began to talk to me, and I pulled out my AirPod to listen to what he was saying to me. The AirPod fell and landed on the ground, which he picked up for me. He held onto it and stared at it for a few moments before handing it back to me. I was already starting to get bad vibes from this man. The conversation went something like this. "Your eyes are so beautiful. Did you get them from your mom or your dad?" I don't know, my mom, I guess." I kept my replies short to signify I wasn't in the mood for talking, but he continued nonetheless. "What bus are you catching? Where do you live?" I laughed nervously and told him I didn't feel very comfortable sharing that information. I told him it was farther up north. Completely unprompted, he then said, "Why, it's not like I'm going to rape you. Isn't it really fancy up there?" This is where I began to feel seriously uncomfortable and began to shake. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which I said yes. He proceeded to ask if I planned to marry him, to which I laughed and said yes again. "Oh, it kind of sounds like you're just rooting him. Are you sure you want that?" I was shocked and looked at him again. "Yes, I do plan to marry my partner. What business is it of yours?" "How old are you?" I don't know what came over me, but I told him I was 21 to make it come across I was old enough to stand up for myself. "Are you on the pill? Do you use condoms instead?" I wanted to walk away, but I was grounded to that bench and couldn't move a muscle if I tried. I was uncomfortable and confused as to why he was getting so close to me. "Do you have someone waiting for you at the bus stop, or are you walking home? How far do you live?" This is the question that made everything click into place, and I realized this guy definitely had malicious intent. He was not being friendly. This man was going to follow me home and either rape me or kidnap me. I started to really panic, and started desperately looking for onlookers. A young man, possibly my age, walked out of the public restroom. He had overheard this conversation and was looking at the predator rather skeptically. I knew then I'd at least have someone to help if I just asked for it. In the moment, though, I didn't. By this point, though, I recalled a video from r/ about a highly pregnant woman and her daughter being followed to their car in an empty car park in the dark by an older man. This lady was stressfully trying to find her keys in her purse, as this man was standing beside her daughters on the opposite side of the car, making small talk with them. I remember someone commented on this submission saying it was a popular thing that he was waiting for her to unlock the car so he could get in and control her via threats to her children. It occurred to me that maybe I could skip my bus and catch another one instead. I did this exactly. He kept trying to ask where I lived, and I kept refusing to tell him where. He also continued to ask how far I lived from the stop and if anyone was waiting for me. I deflected all of his questions, and after 40 minutes he began to get grumpy and walked away from the station. He wasn't there to catch a bus at all, but to prey on young women at the bus stop. I caught my bus when it arrived a few minutes after he left. I ran home, where I completely broke down and cried in the arms of my partner. This morning, I was so stressed I contemplated taking the day off work and staying in bed for the rest of it to cry. I was petrified. In the end, though, I still ended up going, and I'm at work sharing this story. This just happened tonight, so this shit is fresh, and I'm freaked out and honestly quite pissed off. I, 23 and female, met Jason, 23 and male, from an app online last September. We clicked almost immediately, and from then on we went out together about once a week, maybe sometimes twice. We've spent the past year or so going on dates, out to nice restaurants, garden walks, spending the night. We established that we had feelings for each other about 2 months into everything, though we did have our rocky moments, and I didn't fully trust him. At one point, I wanted to date, but he claimed he was too busy with work, which subsequently caused us to separate for a while. Once we eventually came back together, I told him I didn't necessarily need to be exclusive, but we could still hang out as I enjoyed his company. Now, there was always some sneaking suspicions that there was another partner in his life, because he always paid in cash wherever we went and was very secretive about his private life as well. I had voiced these thoughts to him, but honestly didn't care too much because after he told me he wasn't interested in dating me, I also started seeing another partner. I was using protection with both of them anyway. Meanwhile, he said he didn't want to date me but raged whenever he thought there was another man around my life. He had exhibited some concerning and possessive behaviors, but I let them slide for the most part because I was still doing whatever I wanted. Fast forward to tonight, November 19th, 2019, 14 months after we first met. We went to a really nice restaurant downtown after work. I asked if he wanted to take the subway back to my place, since we'd had a few drinks. We stopped by his car to grab his bag and went off to the station. When we got there, he said he'd forgotten his card in his car. I figured it was no biggie and swiped for him instead. I said he didn't need to pay me back because it was like $2, but he insisted he would Venmo me. When we got to my apartment, I told him he was welcome to take a shower and he went to the bathroom. I was messing around on my phone when I saw CS had sent me $2 for the train. This was quite weird to me because his initials were JN, so I clicked on his Venmo friends list. He only had around 20, so I picked a random person and looked them up on Facebook. I went down on their friends list and would you look at that, a picture of Jason and his brother. The only issue was his name was not Jason, it was Chase Smith. The photo looked a bit different as well because he was 50 or 60 pounds heavier in the photograph and was currently very fit. I'm 90% sure it was him though. Just to confirm this, I googled his name and the area around which he lives, and I got a hit on the white pages. It said he was related to Velma and Shaggy Smith, and I remembered him once telling me his siblings had those exact names. It turned out I didn't even know the name of this guy. He got out of the shower and sat down on my bed. I was quiet and looked at his face. "Is your real name Chase Smith?" This motherfucker looked me dead in the eye and said, "No." You guys, I lost it. I must have made that leave Brittany alone guy look calm and collected. I started crying, telling him to get the fuck out of my house. He approached me and I told him not to touch me, but he grabbed my wrist tightly and insisted we had to talk about it. I told him again to get the fuck out and never contact me again. He refused to leave for a while, but eventually I was able to break free of him and force him out. Afterward, I looked a little bit deeper and found out he has criminal records, though I can't see what they're for at the moment. From his past behavior, I'm honestly a little bit worried for my safety. I immediately blocked him on everything, and I know for a fact he's gonna go apeshit when he realizes he can't contact me. Everything has been a lie. When you think you know someone, it turns out they're probably crazy. Admittedly, it's a little bit funny because what the fuck, but I'm also getting some serious you vibes, and I'm not quite ready to die yet, you know? It'd be real cool if this guy never came around again. Update. My sister has continued to sleuth. Turns out today he slightly changed the spelling of his last name on Facebook, probably to deter others he's been messing around with from finding his profile. He doesn't know that I still found him though, and doesn't realize the spelling of his last name wasn't really relevant in the process either. This dude is an actual psycho, who's probably doing this to multiple women. I'm more afraid for them than myself, because they clearly don't know this is going on, if he's taking further steps to hide himself. I wish I knew who they were so I could somehow reach out and warn them.